Hi, in this lecture we explored the ideal of agile requirements, and we started the lecture with this very famous joke, which is what our customer envisions at the very beginning of the project, how then it goes, and you can see that the person just wanted a tree with a couch in there. This was the vision, but then we start to deliver lots of different things, not what the person wants, and at the end we see that what the person really needed is a bit different from the initial vision. So this is what requirements are about, right? So we want to learn and find out what the final user needs and then build it. But that's quite tricky. And just to give you some impression of the importance of requirements in the domain, this paper was discussing psychology in software engineering and the differences between individuals. And one of the big differences that they notice is that the domain matters a lot for developers. So depending on the domain that you are, you may be more productive or less productive. So in a way, this is an indirect evidence that requirements can be important. Then we started with this challenge for you to think about requirements, and the challenge was think about a software like Brightspace. What does it do? What does it not do? Who are the users that are going to use the software? Do we have some other requirements like it needs to support 8,000 users per second? Maybe it needs to reply within 1 second. Are there other kinds of requirements like this? We call them non-functional requirements. What is definitely important right now, because we're starting this software from scratch and delivering an entire Brightspace can be too much, but what are the most important things we should deliver right now? And what are the things that are important, but maybe not very important right now, and we can start the software, we can get some return of investment even without these features. So this is in a way, again, what requirements are about, and then we went to user stories, and user stories are the way that agile people like to represent their features, their functionalities, their requirements. And as they define it, user stories are just clear and concise ways of describing a feature. It represents the perspective of the user, so the people that are gonna actually use the feature, and it has a strong emphasis on the value that feature will deliver. Just to be more concrete, we had this template. So if you try to formulate your user stories as type of the user I want, then the feature you want, so that, and then the value it delivers. For example, as a teacher or as a TA, a teaching assistant, I want a report of all students who submitted all assignments so that I can give them bonus points. So we have, in a way, the actors or the users that want the feature. So this will benefit teachers and TAs. We describe the feature itself, and we describe the value it brings to the software. But maybe just this description is not enough. We need to also discuss how, when we know that the story is done, and we call this acceptance criteria. And as a developer, you can use this criteria to guide yourself and to know when you're done and what to build. And usually the acceptance criteria quite describes the feature with more details. For example, for the story we were discussing, maybe the report should contain the names of the students and their IDs, and the report should appear in alphabetical order, right? And maybe only logged users can have access to this feature, and the option in the menu should not appear if there are no activities in this course. So a user story is a set of so the main part of the user story, and then some acceptance criteria that guides us in order to build the feature. So then I just put it together in a card. I gave it a title. A title just helps us to better identify the story, maybe a number. And then I asked you to write one user story. And as soon as you did it, we started this discussion on, is this enough? Can I really build complex software by only describing as I want so that, and then some acceptance criteria? That cannot be possible. We are missing something, right? And of course we were missing something. And then to show you what we were missing, we did this game. And you were in teams of 2 people. One of you was the implementer, the other one was the requirements person. And then one wrote the requirement of a drawing, the other one had to implement the drawing. And then in the first round, you all quite delivered some ugly drawings, but in the second round, as soon as we introduced communication, meaning the two people were allowed to communicate instead of just relying on a piece of paper, then the drawings got much better. This was the drawing you implemented, and we saw the results. They were set. What did we do wrong? So in the first phase, where it was just about a person implementing a requirement that was in a paper, we missed communication and we missed feedback. There was no one to tell you, well, this drawing needs to be, this rectangle needs to be more to the left, or this blue color is not the best color, or whatever feedback you needed. So this is what Agile methodologies try to bring to the requirements engineering people, which is communication and feedback. Documents, descriptions of features are very important, and they help us to quickly see what needs to be done. But this in paper only is not enough. Again, we discussed in the previous video, it is very hard for us to know what requirements we need. And sometimes users just know what they need as soon as they see it concretely, right? And they can play with it, and then they can see, wow, this is not what I really want. I need to change this a bit. So communication and feedback are keywords in Agile methodologies and in Agile requirements. And this is why Agile people, they prefer to write lean user stories, because they know that they're going to complement it with communication and feedback. This matches the Agile value that customer collaboration is fundamental, right? Business people and developers should work together. In the second round, everything was a bit better. So a nice way to describe what an Agile requirement is an Agile requirements are an invitation to talk. Communication is essential. Then we discussed some best practices. The INVEST best practice is quite famous, so stories need to be independent, meaning one story should not depend on the other story as much as possible. It has to be negotiable. So it is not a contract that you sign with your blood, but it is something that you can negotiate with the customer. So maybe that story was too big or too hard to implement. Maybe you can divide it in two and then negotiate with the person. In this cycle, in this sprint, we just do one. And the second part of the story, we do this in the second sprint. So you have to have this space for negotiation. It is valuable. So user stories try as much as possible to deliver value to the final customer. If they're not delivering value, maybe we can then not do it right now and do something that will deliver more value, right? And this is a way to prioritize. Estimable, we need to be able to estimate in a way how much building this feature is going to cost in terms of money, in terms of time, whatever you want to measure. Stories try to be small, so small stories are easier to be estimated, it's easier to be developed. Larger stories, we call them epics sometimes, they can be quite hard to deal with. So small stories they seem better. And testable, there has to be a way for you or for anyone to validate that the story is done, that the story is what we want. Then we went for another set of best practices, this one from Roman Pichler, and he suggests us to describe the product from the perspective of our target users and customers. So this as something, right? The something needs to be the target user, meaning we don't want to have user stories that is, as a product owner, I want this. No, it has to be focused on the user that is going to use the feature. Engaging conversation. So the user story is not a specification, but it captures the essence of a conversation about the features of a product. So again, we don't want to be as complete as possible, or maybe we want to be as complete as possible, but there has to be space for conversation. So the product owner and the development team, they need to talk all the time about the user story, and that's how we complete the holes, or the problems of our user story. Story writing is teamwork. It doesn't have to be done by one person, like the product owner is the one responsible for the user stories, but this can be done as a team. So we collaborate together, you, developers, final users, so that user stories are nice and everyone is in line with the product that you're building. Keep it simple. Use language that is easy to understand. Focus on what is important. Leave non-essential information. Refine your stories. So as soon as you wrote the story, you're going to see that maybe it can be written better in the second time you see it. So it is okay to keep refining it. Again, this is not a hard contract, right? Use acceptance criteria. They do help developers to guide themselves on what to deliver. Group stories in themes. Maybe you have this very large feature, part of the system that you need to do. I don't know, the invoice part of your software, and this is quite big. So you're going to have probably many small stories related to the invoice, but group them in themes, so that it makes more sense and it's just easier for you to organize yourself. Visualize your stories, make your stories visible, so find a way to put your stories so that the entire team can see it. And some things, they are not stories. For example, if you want to describe a user interface, maybe prototype is a better way to capture what the customer wants instead of a written user story. So you can add some variation in how you write requirements. I pointed you to this book, User Stories Applied. Actually, we discussed a lot of the content of this book. These are the chapters of the book, the ones that we tried to cover in a way. Epics, we discussed about it already. They are basically large stories. They are very hard to be understood and implemented. They might exist in the backlog because maybe you know that you're going to have this big epic, let's say reports, but it's not the right time to explore it right now, so you just leave a epic in there. But then as soon as the epic becomes important, what you do is to break this epic into small stories so that you can implement them. And then, now that you have all this knowledge on Agile requirements and how important communication and feedback are, we saw UML. And UML is just a general purpose language that we have. And UML allows us to express different things, like requirements in terms of use cases, but then also sequences. Maybe we have a sequence that makes sense to our business that we want to represent, or different activities or different states. UML is quite big in terms of what you can do with it. And if you like UML, can I use UML? Of course you can use it. It's just another language. You just use your favorite language. UML is at the end just a communication mechanism. And if you have in your mind that you, besides doing UML, you're going to need communication and feedback, you're good to go. I showed you an example of a use case diagram. You can see the actors. We have students, TAs, we have teacher. These are the three actors, meaning these are the three users of our system. And there are use cases related to them. For example, a student can see an announcement and a TA can create an announcement. We can see relationships. For example, grade an assignment, a TA can do it. But it depends on a student to hand in an assignment, right? And a fraud check is included in the hand-in assignment. So whenever we hand in an assignment, we do fraud check. But fraud check is such a big thing that we decided to make it a different thing from the hand-ins. In the video that I shared as a pre-activity lecture, there is an entire video on these different UML notations. So I suggest you to watch the video so that if you want to really learn more about UML. Besides this image, the use case diagram, we usually have use case specifications. So for each one of the use cases, for example, for C announcements, we usually have a description in a text format, and we try to say, well, these are the actors that are involved, that's the priority that we have, these are the preconditions for this use case to make sense, these are the post conditions, or after this use case is executed, this is how the system should look like. Then some basic path, so if the user just follows the basic path in that use case, what should happen? Alternative and corner case paths, so we should think about exceptions, right? What happens to a student that is not enrolled in the course? Can he or she see the announcement? So these are alternative paths. And no functional requirements. Maybe students should be able to see an announcement 1 second after the teacher releases the announcement. So we try to specify a bit more. I just put an example on the slides, you can see it later. And as I said, there are lots of diagrams. The ones that I think it makes a lot of sense to you right now are the ones in yellow. The structured diagrams make a lot of sense as soon as you learn object-oriented design, which is you're studying this in Introduction to Programming. But if you want to dive into UML for requirements engineering right now, the yellow ones are the ones that are going to help you. I asked you about your opinion on the differences between UML and Agile requirements. And then we discussed a little bit about business events. So a different way for you to see requirements is to think about business events. So things happen and your software needs to react to those things. For example, an exam has happened and this means that in Brightspace now we need to share the grades or something like that. So if you think about events, these can help you to see what your system needs to do, how your system should react. A lot of people, they like this idea. Let me find the slide about it. We discussed different ways to represent these events, but a lot of people like this idea and they call it event storming, and they like it because real world looks like this, right? Events happen and our software needs to react. For example, the customer just bought something in our website, and this means this is an event, and this means we need to react to it, which can be, well, we need to start the delivery process, we need to start the payment process. After the delivery, we need to start the feedback process. Maybe I want to send you an email. Did you like your product? So event storming is how we call this idea of thinking about events and how our software should react. And I point you to a nice blog post that explains how you can apply this into your company and how you can use this together with your users, with your stakeholders, to learn more about your software. Martin Fowler has nice discussions on how to implement it, to implement domain events, as he calls, but you don't need to dive into it right now. This is very technical, and we're not going to discuss this later, okay? As always, I point you to other directions, and I ended up my lecture with this sentence from Hannah Arendt, and storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And I think it has a lot to do with Agile requirements in a way. This sentence can inspire us. That was it. I'll see you next time.